Although we are sharing this year's event virtually, the festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktahumguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Ntsinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuhavut. We recognize all First Peoples who are here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bears Rebecca Fonte. I am actually the artistic director of IGLIF, the All Genders, Lifestyles, and Identities Film Festival in Austin, Texas, and I'm really excited to be part of the St. John's International Women's Film Festival Q&A for See You Then, which is possibly my favorite film of the year. And I very much want to acknowledge St. John's International Women's Festival to have me back and be able to be a part of the festival again. I think this is super cool. And I get to talk about this film, which has had a very big effect on me. And I get to have the entire team here. So we have the writer and co-director, Mari Walker. We have the writer and co-writer and producer, Kristen Uno. And we have the stars, Puya Moseni and Lin Chen. All right, so let's talk about this. I rewatched the film again last night. I forgot to prepare myself emotionally for it, so I stopped it halfway through, cried a little bit, drank, came back, finished the film. You guys have been touring this film now for several months. You must have come across many people who have had strong personal feelings with it. I'm curious if now that when you're at this point in time, has the film become, how has the film changed for you, Mari, from when you thought about it first to when you showed it first to now, 6 months down the line of experiencing it with film audiences?
Danny Madden, one of my good friends, directed a film called Beast that was released this year. And one of the things that he said was he had talked to another director who had made a film, and he said, after you finish your film, before it's screened for the first time, you should take a day and write down what the film means to you. Because it'll change, over time. And in some ways it has, but I think it's always, I think from filming on, it's felt like it feels like family to me, and I'm just so immensely proud of it. And just all the hard work that everybody put into it. I mean, it's astounding. Seeing it on the big screen had a huge effect on me, because really I'd only seen it on my TV at home, sitting next to it so I can get an IMAX vision of what an approximation of what it would look like on the big screen. And seeing it up on there, I mean, it just really, it so reminded me and enriched, Puya and Lynn's performances were just astounding. Every little mannerisms and beats and emotional things, they were amplified. And I had seen the movie more than hopefully anybody else has ever seen it. That'd be a little worrisome, I think, if somebody had seen it more than I have. But I'm just so grateful for it. And really from its inception of just you're hoping that the movie is going to be made and hopefully it's going to be somewhat reasonably okay, to just coming into it with just the greatest team and just being so immensely proud. And it's just evolved into a greater thing than I ever could have imagined it could be.
When did you first get to see it on the big screen? Because I know when you premiered at South by, it was there were no screenings.
Yeah, I got to see it at the Phoenix Film Festival, and then San Diego, Film Out San Diego. Over the past,
just in 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, oh yeah. So I'm still riding the high of it. Oh my gosh, we had the third screening of Phoenix. We had it at 9 in the morning. And it was like, and I was like, wow, it's a brutal movie to watch at 9 in the morning for anybody. And so I decided to go and sit up in like the front row so I could really get the full IMAX experience. And they had these like really nice plush seats. And I reclined all the way back. And then I was like, oh my God, please do not fall asleep during your own movie, Mari. I swear to God, if you start snoring in the middle of the movie and you're like back, so people would know who you are, you know, and I was like pinching myself, like, stay awake, stay awake. But it was just, I mean, it was amazing. It was glorious. Well, we all hope, you know, I mean, it's the dream.
Yeah. Kristen, let me ask you, you know, as a co-writer on this project, that's a pretty big responsibility. You know, Mari comes to you, and this is obviously going to be at least partially a very personal story. What did it feel like to collaborate with her, and what did that collaboration look like? What form did it take?
Well, it looked like Mari giving me like a partially written start of a script and be like, oh, what do you think? And I was like, okay, you know, we've given each other notes on our writing before, and I gave her some notes, and she's like, you should just like write this part. And somehow I was co-writing the movie with her all of a sudden. But my experience writing has largely been by myself, and it's like very tortuous. You know, you're like the writer and the desk and the discipline, and having a co-writer was amazing. Mari's such a wonderful collaborator. She's always open to new ideas. She's very giving. She's, you know, great about getting scheduling together and meeting up, and like having that partner throughout the process was really beautiful. And we've also known each other since like 5th grade. So we have a really strong foundation of friendship. And I think it just meant so much that she trusted me to write this very personal story where we both drew a lot on our experiences individually as women of a certain age and the world as it is, and how you navigate that and your personal relationships. So yeah, I hope everybody has a writing experience as lovely as I did on this.
Oh, that's such a compliment. Mari, that must be nice to hear.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I definitely felt like I was torturing her a little bit throughout the whole process, but you know.
Let me ask you, what scene in the film, in the finished version of the film, Mari, is the most only possible because of your collaboration with Kristen? What's a scene where you go, oh, I could not have done that without her?
I definitely like the climax, you know, the end of the film. I think like the work. One of the things that Kristen did that was really great was she would insist that we would read the script back and forth to each other. And I, despite doing all these interviews, I hate the sound of my own voice. And so it was torture for me. And I would like, oh, you know, so I do these things and we'd read through it. But really that process of like having somebody there who can like, who you could bounce ideas off and talk about and discuss it. And we would watch, you know, like these grueling fights, cinematic fights or television fights, and like break it down. And one of the things that Kristen was really great about was like, I think it was about 2/3 of the way through the process of writing the script. And it was starting to feel a little like, it was starting to cohese a little bit, but it was still feeling very loose. And she sat down with a giant, like, with a giant board and like drew out like the arcs of the characters and was like, okay, like at this point, like this thing happens and we have to make it happen here. So it makes more sense for the character. And it was just really, it was really helpful having somebody who knows how to write so well and who has studied it and done it personally for so long to like bring that aspect. And the process was just,
because your background was in documentary making prior to this.
Yeah, so I can find the story in the edit, but that's obviously not what narrative is responsible for. And you got to figure it out, you know, because that's the thing. It's the script's the foundation, and then what everybody else brings to it is what can elevate it.
Yeah. Puya and Lynn, I'm very curious. You get the script and you basically realize the entire movie is just the two of you talking. I'm going to assume that you didn't know each other ahead of time. So this entire film builds on a relationship and really a series of one really important day or the day after 14 years ago in these characters' lives that we don't actually see. So how did you work on that? How did you make sure that you had the same knowledge of what your characters were, and how do you develop that chemistry that that only comes from spending time together?
We built it, and I think that was the exciting part. It's kind of like, here's this person in front of you, and you're gonna like build this whole imaginary world with. Obviously, it has to be someone that you kind of feel that connection with, because if you don't, that would be a nightmare. But someone, I mean, for me, someone that you kind of like have chemistry with as like two human beings, but also as artists, your work ethic. How do you like to work? How do you like to approach a role? If I'm going to text you, are you going to be like, well, we're not working right now, so I'm going to text you back tomorrow? For me, it was, I knew that I had the role. So the exciting part, I'm like, oh my God, so who's going to be this like love of my life? No pressure. No pressure. Somebody that is like, I wanted to, it's like marry, and now I'm coming back. But Lynn just had everything. And that's not to say that the other actors didn't have something special, but it wasn't the right thing. I remember Kristen actually saying when they were watching the chemistry reads that I did with the different actresses, they're like, you respond, because that was the thing. I wanted to see how each actor makes me respond in the scene. And Kristen was like, well, this person makes you kind of step back, which, considering that you're one of the two leads, like you can't have that in a two-hander where one person dominates and the other person. Lynn had the excitement, like she wanted to dive in. And when we started from, what kind of music did they like? What is it that they liked about each other 14 years ago? What is it that was special about them? Because otherwise, why would the audience care that they broke up? And I think we captured that. And it really came down to us spending time figuring out those things in the map of their previous relationship, so that even though we didn't talk about it in the movie itself, we knew it, so the audience could sense it.
Yeah, I feel like so much of usually when you get a script, there's so many other characters that you have to like think about who's that person and keeping them straight. I usually take notes of like who's who, but it was just these two people. And so really the luxury of it was luxury in that, like, it was just the two of us, and that any time that we were thinking about anything, it's going to be on screen, and so that feels important, and makes you want to do your job really well. Whereas like usually you're like, I'll just coast during the scene. You can't, there's no coasting going on, but then that's also a lot of pressure. And I have to say that, we had a week of rehearsals beforehand, and Mari and Kristen and the rest of our production team just really made sure that they set up a safe environment for us to do that, which you don't usually get. Usually you just show up and you're like, I did my homework. Let's hope they did theirs. Let's see what happens. And then when they don't, that's when things explode and turn ugly. But luckily, not only did everything work out very well, but also it was just, we were troubleshooting as we went. It was self-care in a way that I feel like our characters did not really have much self-care by the time we get to the end. This was the opposite of that situation.
Well, I mean, the end is only possible because...
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to say, you guys came up with some really fun backstories. Like, didn't you guys have a whole story about how Chris had thrown like a surprise party for Naomi's character back when they were dating, and it was pretty intricate.
Do you remember what the theme of that surprise party was?
I forget, what was it?
It was Dirty Dancing.
That's right.
Of course, someone as corny as I would come up with that, but yeah, that was the theme.
I love that. Yeah, I was just thinking, you were talking about there's no self-care for these characters during the sequence of the film. That there's the only reason they get to that point that they get to at the end of the film is because they have spent all that time together and have like kind of bristled and rubbed against each other and found each other's sort of safe points and danger points, and then at the end they just roll over it and just be like, no, I gotta say this. Every time I see the film, that moment when they're looking at the art and Naomi decides, like, you know what, I still have something I need to say. I'm not going to just let this be a happy moment. And to me, that's a very dangerous moment for the characters, but also for an audience, because essentially when you have a trans director making a film about a trans character, then it's like, okay, now this person is going to turn and say that the trans person did something bad. And that is like, I mean, it's like, it's dangerous territory, and it's so well handled, because I think that the performance is so authentic. But I'd love to talk a little bit about, Lynn, that moment for you, and then I want to hear from Mari about writing that moment.
Yeah, I mean, it is what you said was so interesting about like them spending all of that time together. It's like once you've like don't have like those boundaries anymore, it starts to get muddled. You add in drinking, you add in a late night, you add in like this is now or never feeling, and suddenly you're saying things that you would like, you're definitely gonna regret the next day. Like definitely.
They're on the third date. They're on the third date by the end of the film, you know? I mean, they've done that thing. You get more and more personal as it goes on.
Exactly. And I mean, I feel like that's a lot of, I wouldn't say it's fun to play, but it's very, it makes you really explore yourself in ways and go to a place that like, it's hard to go to that place. It definitely was very emotionally draining playing that part that evening, and I definitely felt it. It felt like a hangover. I said to Puya the next day, I feel like I've been hit by a Mack truck the next day. And I believe I even went up to Mari at a certain point, which I've never done. And I was like, I got nothing. I got no more. I'm done. Turn the camera around away from me. I can't do it anymore. I've never said that before. But I really, truly felt that way. And I think that there's when somebody makes a decision like that, who doesn't want to be making a decision like that, but also feels compelled to make a decision like that, it's like you're exactly right. It's a dangerous place for everyone involved. And it's hard sometimes for your body as an actor to be like, this is fake, but you know, your body's still experiencing it. It's like, no, it's real. We're gonna cry. We're gonna go through all of it. And at a certain point, it just breaks down.
Oh yeah. I mean, I felt that way when I was directing it. I felt like, and it's like, the history and the whatever, but films feel like Horcruxes, and it feels like a part of your soul sometimes can be like ripped out of your body and put onto film. And that definitely, that night was one of those moments. And I think at one point it was after one of the takes, and I just sort of like wandered off. Like there wasn't a lot of space, but I somehow wandered off into the corner of the set and was just like staring at a wall. And Mia had to come over and be like, "Are you all right?" And I was like, just give me a few minutes. Like, let me process this. But I felt like if we were gonna have that moment at the end that I felt like we needed to have for the characters, where I felt like it was leading to this point, I felt like I had to like push as a director and as a co-writer as hard as possible to like make that moment feel authentic and feel real and feel like all these other little pieces along the way were like structured to reach that point, because it is dangerous, and it's dangerous just as a storyteller, because that's a moment you can't come back from. You can't walk that back. You can't, some people were like, oh, is it possible for them to end as friends? And I was like, not with that choice. I just don't think that there's a way for them to bridge that for at least a long time, because that's painful.
Maybe another 14 years. Yeah. Why is it so important for her to say that and not just leave as friends, which at the time, up until that point, it's like, this could be nice. This could be nice to like have a friend that is a girl and that I have some history with, but she felt the need.
I think that.
Why did you feel the need to put it in the script?
I felt the need to put it in the script because it challenged me. It was an idea that challenged me. Like definitely, like, as Chris and I were talking sort of about about my transition and the ways I transition and what things had shifted in my own mind. I think a lot of these ideas would come up of like, what thought experiments are there that like, it would be a line that like would be hard for me to cross. And that decision that Naomi made for me personally, like if I were to hear that from an ex, that would be very hard for me to recover from and let go. And I felt like, okay, well, if that's something that would challenge me emotionally, now from the perspective of being somebody who, you know, believes it's the women's right to choose, obviously, and all these different things, that like to be confronted with that and be like, oh God, like how would I react in the situation, just really interested me. And I felt like if we were able to explore that and like build out the story from that, I think we, you know, I felt like we could tell a story that felt compelling and interesting and had these characters that were multifaceted, and that you hopefully ended where it was like they're both right and they're both wrong. They're both heroes and they're both villains. Like they're just people in this messy situation, you know. But it, you know, it took that was like the lion's share of work, I would say, in particular in the script for Kristen and I. That was a big part of a lot of time was spent talking about that, like discussing what points could be brought up and like tracking it and just trying to make sense, because fights are also messy. They have structure, but they're messy and they go off on tangents and then they come back and they somehow wrap around. Like 4 comments later, it comes back to the comment that happened. You know what I mean? And
well,
it
the
somehow
thing
revolves
about
back.
fights between people who are like have relationships is they really know how to hurt somebody. You know how to hurt somebody much better if you've been in a relationship with them, and so you can really cause damage.
Yeah, and you know, and like when the saying is like they're drinking and they're doing, you know, they're smoking a little bit. It's like it's they're in this state where it's like they almost kind of fall back into what that moment was for them at the end, and that unresolved thing. And I'm sure, you know, as it is for anyone, you know, going back to places that you used to frequent for a specific reason and for a specific purpose or with somebody, you know, it brings back those memories and all that haunted feeling, you know, and all that time sort of walking and thinking, you know.
Puya, when Chris looks back at this day, this epic evening, is she able to remember the earlier parts of the day, or is it just completely overshadowed by the last, you know, 25 minutes? Because it does feel like she has a need here. Chris has a need. You know, she asked for this. Does she fulfill that need? How does she feel at the end of this, and how does she feel about the way it ended?
I feel it's almost like, you know, curiosity killed the cat, sort of. So she wants to resolve this thing that she has in her mind. And she also, I think, has an idea of how it could go. It will be, you know, nice and neat, and things will be resolved and we'll move on. And I will no longer feel this guilt for having just, you know, walked out and all of that. So that's how she enters it. I think how she leaves the night is there's a lot more to think about. But I also believe that there are certain moments you don't plan for, but you have to face it. And that ends up being kind of like a compulsory exorcism and maybe catharsis. So it also forces her to face certain things and hopefully move on from there. Now, how is she going to look back on her relationship with Naomi? I think it's like we said, the following day, probably like, I'm never going to talk to this person. The following week, probably the same. Maybe a year or so after, maybe I shouldn't have said those things because I didn't really have the right to say those things. So I think it's like life, you know, the same exact event would have very different effects depending on when you look at it. So I think in the immediate aftermath, it's like, you know, that woman, a year later, maybe I shouldn't have said it. A few years later, maybe I should apologize. But I do think that one thing it definitely does in Chris's life, I think in a way it releases her, which is what I've said about this movie, that I think it's so much about when how you think your life should have gone meets how your life actually went and what you do with that understanding. And I think this is a moment that kind of makes her face a lot of what ifs, could have been, should have been, and face it as is and maybe appreciate it as is, as opposed to hoping that it would have gone a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I mentioned to you before that like there's so many things in this movie that are echoes of things that had happened to me or were said to me. Like, you know, my ex-girlfriend literally said, "You were the most tender relationship I ever had." And several times she said, "Oh, this makes so much more sense now when I like all that kind of stuff." But she never had that moment of like the blow up at the end, like Naomi has. And so now, since she didn't have that, now it's like I wonder if there is something there that she didn't say because she didn't feel like she could. And I think for Chris, there's got to be a little bit of of that release of I think everything that needed to be said has been said now. It's all out in the open. And that can be liberating, I think.
Maybe more than should have been said, because we don't say everything that travels through our mind for good reasons. But I think this is like, yeah, everything is out, even if more than intended.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a few days. I was gonna say a few days after. I think it was like a few days after we finished the last draft. There was a draft where Kristen and I were reading it back to each other, and I would usually play Chris, and then she would play Naomi, and then we'd read the thing back and forth. And like I said, I usually was very frustratingly would agree to this because but as we were doing it, suddenly I started going off book and then just yelling from the character's perspective at poor Kristen and just and then that's when she said, "No, it feels like it's at the place where we should probably take it to some actual actors who know how to take this material and elevate it versus you just yelling at me." And I was like, "No, you're right." And I was like, "Great, like the script, I think it's like it feels like it's ready." And I think it was like a day later, I got a text from my ex saying, "Hey, I'm coming into town. Do you want to go to dinner?" And I was like, but it was fine. We had a wonderful dinner and she's totally fine. And there was no conflict or anything like that. But there are those things where you wonder that, when you work on something like this or you watch something like this a few times, you start to think about like what would have happened in your life. And that is, I think that's something that the power of independent storytelling and intimate storytelling, hopefully can allow audiences to take that time and think about, take a walk in somebody else's shoes and see what they would do.
Yeah. At what point in time when you're making a film like this, and you're mining your own personal experiences, does the character become separate from you?
It started to feel separate from me, I think, once we started doing the auditions and I started hearing the lines being read, because then it starts becoming something outside of yourself and you're starting to see how other people's physicality or emotional reactions or temperament can like affect the script and affect the character. And that's when it's you're not hearing it. And then it's so relieving because then you're like, okay, cool. I could start hearing the things maybe in my own head that totally made sense. But then when I hear it come out of somebody else's mouth, I'm like, oh, that doesn't land in the way that I thought it would. And then, how do I change it? How do I adjust it to make it into its own character?
Were auditions fun? I mean, I feel like sometimes auditions can be really exciting and sometimes they can be like grueling and like terrible and like.
I just feel like it's such an awful process for actors. I just feel for, Lynn and Puya, both of you, I don't know. It's such a grueling, awful thing, where it's like usually like you go in, you don't know anybody, somebody's filming you, you don't know who's filming you, you don't know where that footage is going to go anyways. And then, you have to sit in front of these people and then they're squawking lines at you. And then, you have to like perform like to nothing, usually to somebody who's like very like doesn't really care about what they're reading anyways. And it's painful and a brutal process. And I was very nervous about it because I had done it once before and it was like, and so I was very, very nervous. And Lynn was the first person who came in and she immediately put me at ease with her warmth and her generosity and her friendliness and just her kindness and her excitement about the script. And it settled me into a place where I was like, okay, cool. Like this doesn't have to be a horrible process. We could still make this into like a friendly, positive, welcoming process. And it doesn't have to be painful. And and that's what I hope that we could give all the actors that came into the audition process, is just a space where they felt safe and comfortable and welcomed, instead of like this terrible emotional bludgeoning that I feel like it always ends up undergoing.
Well, there's a little bit of a danger that a film like this could become sort of self-therapy. If you,
oh yeah, it was definitely self-therapy. All of it was 110% self-therapy. Well, you know, even just the nature of what I want out of life, I think, has changed as a result of the film, you know, and I'm grateful for that, because I think it, you know, goes to show that art has that power, you know.
Lynn, what about the script did you like? Did you get excited about, and how did you prepare for the audition?
Immediately once I read it, I was like, I must do this. But also having, you know, I've been in the industry a very long time, I knew the chances of that were probably not going to happen. Were probably working against me. So for me, it was like, I've turned auditions into an opportunity to really make a script my own. It's like the only time that you really have control over it without anybody telling you how to do it. So I just did it how I envisioned doing it. But, you know, when I showed up to the audition, it was at Vanishing Angle, and I was like, why does Vanishing Angle sound so familiar to me? And then it turns out that I had filmed part of my directorial debut, I Will Make You Mine, at Vanishing Angle, in the same room I ended up auditioning in. So when I walked in, it was like, that's why it sounds so familiar. And I saw Mari, suddenly it became less of like the test to pass and more of like, oh, she's a first-time filmmaker. She's also a woman of color. She's Asian. Like, this is, we're friends. We're friends. I'm going to help her solve a problem, hopefully. And if I don't, if I'm not the right person, then she'll find someone else, because I saw how not personal it was being on the other side of things, of who ends up getting the part. So for me, it was really like, I remember I came in and I brought like my water bottle. I didn't know where to put my water bottle. I was like, I'm just gonna shove it here in the corner and I'm gonna take swigs from it and throughout. And it became a rehearsal rather than an audition. And for me, it was a lot of fun. And Mari definitely created that environment. But I will say that sometimes it's more helpful when people are like very stoic and don't give you anything, because then you can go home and be like, forget about it, throw away the sides, like, until you hear a phone call. Whereas this, I was like, I think they liked me. I think I like them. I hope they call me. And then like crickets. So, you know, that part I think is pretty bad too. I don't know.
But did you know that you were the first person who auditioned?
Oh, well, yes, because my name was the first on the sign-in sheet, so I knew.
Okay, yeah. So yeah,
I was like, that went well.
That has to be difficult.
They could fall in love with 6 other people throughout the day, so you know.
Yeah. Why did you keep going, Mari? Why didn't you just call it?
I think it was just the nature of, you feel so guilty about the amount of people who are probably already on their way, you know, then, you know, and there were so many different, you know, like anything, there are just a million different readings, and there were some, you know, very great, unique readings, but it wasn't Naomi, you know, and you knew it, you know, and that's, you know, and that's 100% on me, because I am, as you know, Bears, I am notoriously bad with responding to email. So that's on me. 100% on that one. But you know, it's one of those things where it is like the endless audition process, and that's part of the thing is, you know, you go through sometimes, I mean, you know, 50 or 60 people. I mean, if you're really marathoning it, you can go through a lot of people if you have like short sides. But you always land on certain people where you're like, that person brought that to it, you know, and all the way through, you know, from the first, like, you know, because we called sort of all the auditions, and Lynn was like the first person on there, and everybody was like, you know, so we were very excited when we had like the chemistry reads. That was just like such a joy. Oh my God.
Okay, so did you know who Lynn was when she walked in the door? Because Lynn has like a really good history in the LGBTQ film community as being the, you know, the first Asian American like lesbian role, right? And 15 years ago or something.
I had seen Lynn in some clips, and I had actually not seen Saving Face yet. And it's a beautiful film, and I love it very dearly. I have to say though, there's like a moment where it's like, it's so funny when you get to know somebody very like close, and you're very like, I mean, you're very intimate with that person, you care, you know, like, and having that emotional thing, and then like seeing the Saving Face, like the sex scene was like watching my sibling, and I was like, ah. I was just mortified, but it's a beautiful film, and everybody should see it, and I highly encourage it. But it definitely, like, I definitely was not prepared for that, and it definitely did startle me. I have to say,
I'm going to ask Kristen this.
I was going to say, Mia had the same reaction, so it wasn't just me. And when she told me, I was like, I'm so relieved, because I was just like, oh, but anyways, it's a great film. Everybody should watch it.
I'm going to ask Kristen this question because it's probably too difficult of a question to answer for Mari. So obviously Lynn was the perfect person to play Naomi, but if there was somebody else that would have taken the character completely different in a different way, I want to know what that character would have been like. Not who it was, because I don't give a crap. I won't know who they were anyway. But like in another world, what was another version of Naomi that you saw?
Another version of Naomi. Sorry, I didn't quite get the first half of that answer because
I was saying obviously Lynn was perfect, and that was the decision, and she was the right person to go. But you saw another 40 people, right? So not even that there was a second choice, but like it's all about matching the character and what they're going to bring to it. There's another world in which another person did something completely different with this role, because the lines are so fertile. These are great scenes for actors. Like, I think that these scenes should be, I used to teach high school, so these scenes should be taken out and done as like speech team scenes, because there's so much in there, and they're just 2-person scenes, and you can get so much, and they run in like kind of 10-minute moments, right? So I'm curious, like when a high schooler plays this role, like what is another version of Naomi? Because I think that'd be really interesting.
No, that's an interesting question. I think that if you consider another version of Naomi, you have to consider another version of Chris, because I feel like it's all about the balance between the two characters. We saw some actors come in who were a little more like aggressive and forward, and a little different in their delivery, a little less interior and a little more like wearing their emotions on their sleeve. And I thought that was really interesting to watch. But then like you need a Chris who's a little less, withdrawn and shy and accommodating, because they have to meet that energy, or, as I was kind of talking to Priya about during the audition process, then one becomes dominant as opposed to this give and take. So I think if you're considering like a different version of Naomi, you have to think about like, well, then how is the Chris playing off of that? Because they have to like meet each other. And so that there's this pumping up and this overlapping of their emotionality. So if you have someone who's like a little more aggressive and loud and like leaning in, then you need that from the other half as well. So I think it's really just about finding two actors who can bring that, dynamicism to each other and draw that out in each other, so that one doesn't get, walked on by the other, in a sense.
I think that was one of the things that I that I really felt was important. There's a lot of talk really early on in the process of writing this, where Matt Miller had proposed, like, what about turning it into a play and like doing a bunch of runs and like doing it in Pasadena and then sort of building it out from there. And one of the things that that I really wanted to do is I wanted to give two actors an ability to really put their stamp on the characters and make them their own. And I think that is really important, because then it just builds out like who these people are permanently, and I really relished that idea, because I felt like, if it was read through by a lot of different actors and in like a play structure, it has like value to that. But I also think like giving like just an indelible portrait just makes it just so magical. And that's like part of the power of cinema, you know, and that's like, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
And it was like, and it was just, there were so many moments along the way. And one sequence in particular, I've always really like fallen in love with over and over again. And, you know, I mean, it's my own movie and I can sit there and be like, this is wrong. Like I did this, you know, it's all me. It's like, oh, like Mari, you did this dumb thing today and you did that dumb, like, look at that dumb thing that you made them do. But what Lynn brought to the bar really, like, that was like a part where it really like elevated that entire sequence to give it just such a chemistry and a humor and like this energy that was so distinct and like beautiful to watch. And then that contrast with Puya's like attempts to kind of like pull her back into these like quieter moments or moments of reflection or moments of gratitude. And it was just incredible to watch on set, and then even more incredible in the edit. And that was something in particular, like watching it on the big screen again, I was just like, God damn, that scene. Like I removed myself from it and I'm like, directing, whatever, but like, God damn, these performances are just fucking stellar. They're just so goddamn good. Anyways.
It was so lovely that we got to film pretty much chronologically. I feel like it really added to the film and to the performances. Like we shot the restaurant first, we shot the bar next, and you can feel them kind of cozying up. And then interestingly, the final scene that we shot was them. It's one of my favorite sequences. It's them walking down the street from the restaurant to the bar. And you really do feel that sort of coziness between the characters. And that was our last day on set. And I think some of the wistfulness of it being the last day seeped into their performances, and this feeling of, you know, something that's gone and that you can't grasp again. And I really love that sequence personally.
It was also blindingly
cold. So what did you have to
night.
film after the? What did you have to film after the big conflict? What was the next day?
That was it. So we filmed the conflict. So we had filmed like the jumps forward in time, sort of littered throughout, and then the final 3 days were the conflict at the end, and then the walk down the street from the restaurant to the bar. And it was blindingly cold. It was brutal. And they had these narrow corridors in San Dimas, so the wind would just shoot all the way through it. It was just, it was so cold. But it was also like, we had a great thing halfway through, all the lights. They were like, we're gonna keep the lights on all night. Half the lights were gone in the middle of the night. And I was like, great. So we're like stringing like these cables across the street in hopes that the police won't like be like, what are you doing? You know? And it was like, we were reaching like right at the end, but that was like, oh gosh, like there are just certain times when you're on set and you're working on things where you just feel magic. And you know, I'm just grateful that I felt that so many times on set, you know, with this group of people. I mean, just made it all worthwhile.
Yeah, you have a pretty amazing cast here. Let's talk about some people who we haven't talked about, because it's really interesting that it is a two-person scene, and then there's like 2 interruptions with these men kind of making their presence known. Yeah. You know, you've got the attractive one and you've got the dopey one. But the reactions aren't all that different. What's it like to be doing like this super intense, like 2-person thing where it's all like really important information and emotions, and then it's like, okay, now we're going to interrupt it with this, you know, what were those scenes like? Because was it relaxing to be able to do that, to get out of that moment for a while?
I would say on
what do
you
think, Puya?
Yeah.
I
look like you want to talk.
It was fun. And I think part of it was just variety, because, you know, Lynn and I, oh, here's this one other person, which is kind of like, it allowed you to explore a slightly different dynamic. It was also that those scenes were, well, one of them was definitely a little more just fun and, you know, I don't want to say adorable, but there was just more fun going on, and the fun that we had with each other. And the other one also, you know, it just had a certain romantic feel to it. So it was just a slightly different energy than everything else that we did before or after. And they were also just great actors to get to work with. So just if nothing else, just the variety of that, to just explore something out of our 2-person bubble, that was great.
Yeah.
It was a challenge to write, though, because they were such short scenes with characters that really fit archetypes, you know. So it was a lot of like trying to plus it and then bringing the actors in for, you know, the rehearsal process and then on set and trying to find the humanity in those characters, because, you know, they're people too, and you know, they're not just objects to be sort of thrown around in the story. But Danny and Niken both brought a lot, and brought a lot of them, you know, like, I mean, Danny brought all of his humor, and Niken brought all of his just graciousness and kindness as he does. And it was a lot of fun. The back scene with Niken was challenging because that was probably our smallest location. And I think at the time I had imagined kind of this like wide, you know, like these giant steps kind of going up like a courthouse sort of steps. And well, we couldn't find that in Glendale or Burbank. So we ended up using this space out in the back. And so we had to do a lot of creative footwork to try to like make that space look bigger than it actually was. And the credit goes to Tom Wyman, for our production designer, and Jordan, of course, our DP, for really trying to like expand that space.
Yeah, but
we were
to a certain extent, like being crammed together in that, it actually adds the tension. It works really well.
Great. Yeah. Well, and also we were fighting light because the sun was rising, so you could start to see like little shades of blue. And like I was just sweating in the corner with my little monitor, like, oh God, the sun's coming up. We got another 2 takes left or whatever, you know, and that's the high of also directing, right? You know, it's like you're chasing the great dream of finding every perfect moment. It's awesome.
Chris
wants to say something. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm always interested to see how people react to those characters. I remember I gave my partner the script to read initially, and he was like, I don't know, like, do guys talk like that? Like, I don't know if I've met a guy like that. And I'm like, oh, I've met guys like that. So I'm always curious to know like how people react to those characters, because I've definitely met men like that in my life. But sometimes when, you know, I've shown it to like other gentlemen, they're like, oh, that seems a little over the top. But I think Danny did such a great job of exploring all of the ups and downs of that character in a, you know, humanistic way. I think his performance really gave it.
Danny's the professor, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yep. There's an interesting victory moment in that too, though, for Chris, because this is somebody who she knows who now does not recognize her and also is hitting on her, which is weird, but also like it's totally a victory when you go back to a place that you have been and are not recognized.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's
the fear that goes with it, like of being found out. But that I think also made it very authentic. Like, is he gonna know who I am?
So one moment that is maybe my favorite moment in the movie, but it's so silly to say it's my favorite moment because it's so small. But it just shows how well directed this film is, because there's these little micro movements. I mean, obviously micro expressions and aggressions are written into the script, but micro movements, like when they are sitting down for the first time and they're just talking, and Chris reaches across the table and touches Naomi's hand, and then we get this great shot that you do from like below the hand, and it's just Lynn's eyes just going like, oh, this person is touching me, you know, and it's still this person that's visiting, or, you know, it hasn't become she, which is that's a great moment later when she starts referring her to a third person as she. In this case, it's this person is touching my hand, and I don't know how I feel about it, and I think I don't like it. And there's so much in that moment. But, you know, how do you, I guess I'm just curious to give me the background on that moment of like, because obviously you knew you were going to do it because you put a camera down there.
Oh yeah. Well, I felt like that was there's a couple of things about that moment. Is that's the first sort of new placement of the camera that we've seen. We really haven't seen anything from that low angle before. But also we jumped the line in terms of the sort of switching sides. And it can often have a very like disorienting effect for the audience. And I really wanted to kind of amplify that, where it's like, now we've crossed that boundary into this territory where we're going to start seeing echoes of what happens, you know, later in the film, with the whole sort of restaurant being like a kind of like a small microcosm of what sort of happens in the larger scale of the story. But it was a lot of fun because Jordan and I had planned that for a long time, and really felt like that moment could really land, for obviously for a lot of different reasons. And in the edit, it was just really fun cutting that together, and feeling that like, oh yeah, that instinct, like that actually worked. And it felt like you felt that like that turn happen in Naomi. But I think it's also like a sense of, you know, just that it's what, you know, it's what Chris says. It's the, you know, friends like you along the way. It's this, you know, sort of rewriting of the past to give it like a less of a caustic sort of sheen over it, you know, and to say like, oh, it's everything's gonna be fine, and you know, it's just so great to have you as a friend, and that is like that huge trigger for Naomi, where it's like, oh, I just don't want to hear that, because that does erase, and because as you find out later, that erases so much of her history and how much she dictates her life. So it really is that moment, and that line in particular, I think, is the thing that really just like a knife, you know. But words, you know, words matter, you know. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, Chris wants it to be further along than it is. Like when they sit down, Chris wants to be an hour later into the conversation.
Oh yeah, definitely jumping right into the fun, and you know, and I think that yeah, that's just indicative of her character. And I think a lot of times how people that have dealt with a lot of trauma view the past, they want to view it through this prism of like looking at the positive and thinking about like, how do I work past this? Well, you know, I can do it by combating it against by opposing the emotion of what happened to me. But I think that you know, it sometimes comes with the dangerous territory of having the ability to just blow up if you're viewing something so completely different than somebody else, to protect yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's not fair, you know, to the other person. Often more often than not.
Yeah. So I said this before, I think this is it's an important film because I do believe this is the first time we have a transgender director directing a transgender actress playing a transgender role. Most Hollywood films or even independent films slight on one of those things. They're just like, well, it'll be all right. I think it's really important. I think it's really important that the story gets told this way by you. And I'm wondering how it's felt being ambassadors, you know, in the industry. I mean, you've played almost every queer festival. I assume you've played a lot of women's issues festivals. You know, you're on the front line of this. I really want to know what it's been like. You know, what have people said to you, audiences, festival directors? I want to peek behind the process of touring this.
Oh, I mean, it's been it's been amazing. You know, so much of the experience has been online, so a lot of it's just through comments or people like messaging over Facebook or Instagram. Seeing it in person, feeling that audience, you know, can definitely have like a huge effect, and you know, just being grateful for the emotional reactions that we've gotten from audiences, and knowing that the film is important for those reasons. But at the same time, I think, you know, like, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but wishing I didn't have to be an ambassador because there were enough filmmakers and films that ambassadorship didn't need to exist. But you know, I have hope. I've met a lot of people along the way who are young and up and coming, like writers, trans filmmakers, that I'm really excited about their work, and like and seeing how they evolve as filmmakers. You know, I think you can really only write, you can only find your voice if you know yourself. And seeing so much of that evolution, and even people that I've known before transitioning, after transitioning, like, and seeing that evolution even in their writing and like what they want to write about, what they're interested in. It's really exciting. And then, you know, I think that we just have to keep on pushing, you know, pushing for these stories, pushing for these storylines and getting these filmmakers out there. And I hope that we are one of many films, of which, you know, there have been in the festivals, about queer characters and minority characters, and we need more of it, as much as humanly possible. I mean, my God, we're so behind because, you know, like we don't need another, you know, we need more of our own stories being told. Oh my God, it's crazy.
Yeah. Puya, how has it felt for you?
I'm very grateful for it. Also, as an Iranian American, I know that there are so many queer people from my home country that have never seen themselves being represented. And in that way, it's very important to me because, in a way, this is a gift that I get to share with them, that one of you gets to be seen, gets to be in a story that's written with care, that's written with love, that's written for a human being. And while it may be a first of its kind, as you said, you know, it's like a trans writer, you know, a collaboration between two women of color, a trans director, a trans character, a trans actor. While it may be a first of its kind, I definitely hope that it is not the last, and I don't think that it will be the last. But I think what it will also allow people to see that there's more than one way of telling a story that involves a trans character, because I also don't want to call it, it's not a trans story. It's a story about two human beings, one of whom happens to be trans. That doesn't make it a trans story. And I think we've gotten into this idea, well, that's a trans story. I'm like, it's a human story. And allowing people to see that you can have a trans character and they have the same fears, the same desires, the same regrets as anybody else. And in that way, allowing us to be part of society as opposed to like a dark corner that nobody wants to look at. And I think movies like this can allow filmmakers, audience, producers, and actors to get to explore different variations of an otherwise very badly represented and underrepresented community.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that it's not a trans story because I do agree with what you're saying, but I also believe that it is like I called it a cisgender primer. That this is a movie that everybody who's cisgender really needs to see, so they understand how to talk to people who are transgender and see all the mistakes that people make that they don't need to make. You know, if they know how much certain things matter, then maybe they'll be able to avoid those things.
That's what I mean. It's a human story. We all deserve to be loved and respected and seen for who we are.
Yeah. Well, so what is happening with the film next? I mean, I'm assuming you've been playing all around the circuit. Is it gonna come out for the rest of the world to see?
Yeah, we're in another, I think, 10-ish festivals in the coming months, and then we're starting our international rollout, which I'm super excited about. It'll be really interesting to sort of get all these, you know, like outside opinions about cinema in particular, and the different views on which countries and which cinema they're interested in. And then Puya just won the best performance at Outfest, which is amazing. And you know, we're just gonna keep on jamming with festivals and keep on getting it through. We are going to be distributed sometime in the first-second quarter of next year, hopefully with a theatrical release as well. Fingers crossed, you know, all things considering with COVID and all that. But it'd be really nice to get into some of those plush seats again and recline, and then hopefully not fall asleep, because that would be embarrassing. I wake up, oh yeah, I know this scene. Yeah, okay.
You know, eventually you'll stop watching your movie. I mean, at a certain point, you don't need to watch it anymore because you have it memorized.
Oh yeah, well, oh my gosh, I have it memorized even before I went to those. But it was great to just have, you know, I thought that too. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go see it once, make sure the DCP was working properly because I made it and I was stressed. And then I ended up just really just enjoying it, like seeing it outside of myself and being like, look at these amazing performers and look at these amazing sets and look at this amazing cinematography. And and the score from Bob Allaire, and like, I mean, my God, like just yeah, it feels like that thing where it's like it takes a village. It feels like the village made it, and I can see it, and it just fills me with immense pride.
And it's nice to be able to bring it to a village. I mean, it's got to,
Yeah.
being in an audience and hearing response. You don't know how your movie is really being received. It's these virtual festivals are both problematic and wonderful, because like on one hand, you're all getting to attend the festival and have a conversation. This would never happen. I mean, like,
Exactly.
I can't think of a time when I've, went to a festival and the entire team was there, right?
Right.
It's just too expensive. But you can always do that with virtual festivals if people are taking the time and care about the project, which clearly you all care very much about. This project was so nice to see. But on the other hand, you don't know what people are seeing when they're watching it. So I would encourage everybody who just watched this movie to please go onto social media and talk about it, talk about what you like, spread the word, because that is the only way that filmmakers know, like, kind of how you're feeling, and they want to know that they touched you, and that they can feel like that they were there in the audience with you. So
yeah,
highly encourage that. And I want to thank you guys all for taking the time to hang out and talk about the film. I want to thank the St. John's Women International Film Festival for programming the film and giving us a space to have this conversation and to be, really pushing forward important work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having us. And yeah, thank you to the St. John's and for the audiences out there, just, please keep on watching these movies, support independent film. Like, let's keep on supporting the arts, because we still need all the support that we can get. And my God, like, we got a lot of stories. I know way too many people were like, I wrote 10 scripts during the pandemic. We gotta get these stories out there. We gotta get these stories out. It's crazy. It's crazy. Anyway, thank you for having us.